The afternoon was quiet, the kind of silence that felt peaceful, yet lonely. She had gotten used to it. Ravi was always busy, working late, leaving early. The house felt more like a waiting room than a home. She didn't complain. This was life, wasn't it? Responsibilities, routines, distances growing without anyone noticing. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. She wasn't expecting anyone. As she walked to the door, she wiped her hands on her dress, pushing aside the faint irritation at being disturbed. When she opened it, Amit stood there, smiling in his usual easy way. "Ravi's not home," she said automatically. "I know," Amit replied. "I was just passing by and saw the lights on. Thought I'd say hello." It felt strange. Amit had been a family friend for years, someone she had always considered almost like an elder brother to Ravi. But in all that time, he had never once dropped by alone. Still, it felt rude to turn him away, so she stepped aside, letting him in. He settled onto the couch like he had done countless times before, but something about today felt different. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was just her mood, or maybe she was imagining things. "Tea?" she asked, out of habit. "Only if it's no trouble," Amit said, watching her closely. She walked to the kitchen, filling the kettle with water, trying to shake the odd feeling creeping up her spine. Maybe she was just overthinking. Maybe she had gotten too used to being alone, and any company felt unfamiliar now. When she returned, Amit was still watching her, his expression unreadable. "You must get bored," he said suddenly. She frowned. "What do you mean? Being alone all the time. Ravi's always working. You spend most of your time in this house by yourself, right?" She forced a small laugh. "It's not that bad." Amit tilted his head. "Still, you deserve more than just silence." Something about the way he said it made her grip tighten around the tea tray. She pushed the thought aside, placing his cup in front of him. Maybe he was just making conversation. Maybe she was reading too much into it. She sat down across from him, taking a slow sip of her own tea. Amit smiled, but for the first time, she noticed something behind his eyes, something she didn't quite understand yet. She placed her cup down, forcing herself to ignore the strange feeling creeping in. Amit had always been friendly, but today, there was something different about his tone, something that made her uneasy. "You know," he said, stirring his tea slowly, "Ravi tells me everything." She raised an eyebrow. "Everything?" Amit nodded, leaning back. "How busy he is, how he barely has time for anything else, how he worries you might feel neglected." She stiffened slightly. Ravi never spoke to her about such things, never admitted that he noticed the growing distance between them. And yet, here was Amit, claiming to know things she didn't. "I'm fine," she said, keeping her voice neutral. Amit smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Are you?" She didn't respond, choosing instead to take another sip of her tea. The conversation was making her uncomfortable, but she didn't want to overreact. He was a friend, after all. Amit set his cup down, his gaze never leaving her. "You know, a woman like you shouldn't be left alone so much. You deserve attention, someone who notices you, someone who—" He stopped, as if catching himself. "I mean, someone who listens." A small chill ran down her spine. There was a shift now, subtle but undeniable. His words weren't just friendly concern. They carried something else, something unspoken. She forced a smile. "Ravi does his best. We all have responsibilities." Amit chuckled softly. "Of course. But responsibilities shouldn't come at the cost of love, should they?" She placed her cup down with a little more force than necessary. "Amit, what are you trying to say?" For a moment, he said nothing. He just held her gaze, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head. "Nothing. Just making conversation." But she wasn't convinced. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that made her stomach twist. She suddenly wished she hadn't let him in. The room felt smaller now, the silence between them heavier. She glanced at the clock, hoping time had moved faster than it had. Amit noticed. "I should go soon," he said, standing up, but he didn't move towards the door. Instead, he took a step closer to her. She stood too, keeping a careful distance. Yes, I have things to do. Amit smiled again, but this time, it felt more like a test. Of course. I was just passing by. Anyway.
She didn't respond.
She just watched as he picked up his phone, checking something before finally stepping towards the door. Just as he reached it, he turned back. If you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me. She nodded stiffly, not trusting herself to say anything else. As the door closed behind him, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Something had changed today, and she wasn't sure what to do about it yet. She locked the door and leaned against it, her heart still unsteady. The air inside the house felt different now, as if something invisible had shifted. Amit's words echoed in her mind, each one carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. She walked to the living room, picking up the untouched teacups with slightly trembling hands. Her mind raced. Had she imagined it? Had she overreacted? But no, the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, the way he lingered, it wasn't in her head. Just as she placed the cups in the sink, her phone vibrated. A message. From Amit. I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable. I just feel bad seeing you alone so much. You deserve to be happy. She stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. There it was. The confirmation she didn't want. He wasn't just being friendly, he was testing the waters, seeing how she'd react. She put the phone down without replying, feeling an unease she couldn't shake. Amit had always been around, always been Ravi's friend, and now, he was someone she wasn't sure she could trust. Minutes passed, then another message came. I just meant that if you ever need anything, you don't have to be alone. She clenched her jaw. There was no misinterpreting it now. He was pushing boundaries, seeing how far he could go. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. Should she tell Ravi? But then what? Would he believe her? Would it create problems between them? Between him and Amit? A loud knock at the door startled her. Her breath caught, heart racing. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she walked toward it, hesitating before opening it just a crack. Amit. She gripped the door handle tighter. Why are you back? He gave a sheepish smile. I forgot my keys on the table. Her eyes flickered past him to his car parked outside. He could have called. He could have waited for Ravi. But he chose to come back. She opened the door just enough for him to step inside, keeping her distance as he grabbed his keys. But instead of leaving, he turned to her, his voice softer now. I hope you don't think badly of me. I was just being honest. Her pulse quickened. Amit, I think you should go. For a second, he hesitated, like he wanted to say more. But something in her expression must have warned him not to. He nodded, slipping his keys into his pocket.
All right.
But if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me.
She didn't respond.
She just watched as he stepped out, closing the door behind him.